Thanks for joining us. You're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. The whole story about palm oil is actually dominating some of our news cycle for the past week or so. So today we shall talk about palm oil. Very recently, Sarawak Report has published a story that shows that the state's Land Custody and Development Authority, or LCDA, which was set up by and headed by the former Chief Minister Taib Mahmud, has done some of an interesting news recently. So Claire Rucastle-Brown, the editor of Sarawak Report, claims that the land was passed into the ownership of his son Abu Bakr for a price that has yet to be determined or made public. Because the land records are kept inexcusably secret, according to Claire, she says that the locals reported that they were never alerted to the sequestration of their lands, let alone compensated for it. These lands are now placed under one of Abu Bakr's own companies, Radiant Lagoon, last year, and sold on for an undisclosed amount to the plantation and property tycoon Yi Ming Seng from Bintulu, who later on then bought Abu Bakr's 99% ownership of Radiant Lagoon just before the last election. Of course, these stories are actually quite common in Sarawak, and more important, we have to focus on what these lands are made use for, because one of the arguments is that these lands, while they may grow palm oil, there's a lot of stories of corruption, a lot of malpractice that happens around it. And because these are just one of the many items that are currently being done here in Malaysia when it comes to palm oil plantations, very recently, even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have had to make some comments regarding palm oil on the international circuit. This time, Wisma Putra is in quarrel with Norway. On 3rd December last year, the Norwegian Parliament voted to limit and phase out palm oil through measures and in taxes as well in biofuels policy. Effective 1st January next year, 2020, the Norwegian Parliament requested its government to formulate a comprehensive proposal on biofuel policies in order to exclude biofuels with high deforestation risk. In this context, the Norwegian Parliament cited palm oil as a high contributor to deforestation, and it is a decision that Malaysia, according to Wisma Putra, sees as a de facto ban. The government and the people of Malaysia, according to Wisma Putra, strongly opposes the proposed ban on palm oil biofuels. This ban, according to Wisma Putra, is discriminatory and unfair and would effectively negatively affect 650,000 small rural farmers across Malaysia, and according to Wisma Putra, says that it will adversely impact the earnings and well-being of nearly 2 million Malaysians as a whole who are dependent on the palm oil industry for their livelihood. So with all the commotion regarding palm oil here in Malaysia, we asked one of the investors that we've known for quite a bit, James Hay of Pangolin Fund, and James is here to discuss with us to find out what it is all about, particularly from the eyes of the investor, and to understand better what steps people like you and me can take moving forward. James, thanks very much for having us.
Thank you for having me on.
The last time we had you on was close to a year ago, just before the elections, and you were saying things along the lines of Malaysia is ready for a new government, and that interview was aired on our review. You can easily access that. Are you, before we start into the story of palm oil, are you happy with the present stage of where the government is right now?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the stage of the present government, what they're doing. However, I think they're missing out to a certain extent on some easy things they can do. And I think for a lot of people, things haven't changed. Your dealings with DBKL haven't changed. Illegal parking hasn't changed. That kind of enforcement hasn't changed. So we read in the papers all the big fish have been caught and going to go to trial, and we'll see what comes of that. But what would change everybody's life in Malaysia? Clearing out the rubbish, putting bins everywhere, proper litter collection. An easy thing would improve everybody's life. That kind of thing doesn't seem to be even being discussed at the moment. And I think the government needs to get their eye on the ball, back on the people who voted for them, and try to make their lives better, rather than just going for the big stuff.
One of the promises that they made last year was to abolish tolls. Earlier this week, we saw that news coming across, where they are in talks with Gamuda. Yeah. 4 highways are going to be, going through some toll, I would call that phasing out. So, are they fulfilling their promises in this sense?
I think that's fine. And I think they've explained when they can afford to do it, they'll do it. And I think everybody accept that. But there is some stuff, that the dealings that everybody deals with every day with the police, you know, what's the difference there with the enforcement of all sorts of things, just with day-to-day stuff? I'm not sure there's been much changed at the lower level. So obviously when there's a by-election or coming up, everybody suddenly cares about local issues. But apart from that, it just seems to be the big stuff again. I might be wrong, maybe it's all going to change overnight. But, you know, I think they need to keep their eye on that ball, otherwise they might well lose by-elections. There's always a protest vote in a by-election.
Of course, the by-election is happening this weekend, after all. Again, I want to draw back to the story of this show, which is palm oil, and the question of whether or not it is in crisis. Wisma Putra just said that, you know, over 2 million Malaysians at large is going to be affected by this policy.
An awful lot of people grow cocaine or coca in South America, right? But everyone tries to eradicate that crop. So that is an argument, but it's not necessarily the argument. We are named after an endangered animal, the pangolin or tenggiling in Malay. We have never invested in palm oil or timber because of the loss of habitat. These industries go hand in hand with destruction of forest. That report from Sarawak report last week, I forwarded it to all my investors, who are nearly all overseas, and I've had a fantastic response. I'm not sure I've ever had so many replies, all of which have been favourable. On this subject. This is an issue which people really care about, and it's not just an anti-Malaysia thing. They care equally about soya oil, about Brazilian rainforest deforestation. There is also a roundtable for sustainable soya oil, which never gets any press here because we only ever hear about palm oil. So it's not just picking on Malaysia and Indonesia, it's worldwide environmental awareness.
Okay, I just want to pull up the visual, if my people can pull out the visual from Intro Palm Oil. That visual of Intro Palm Oil talks about the story of Claire Rucastle-Brown, and how she highlighted the story of a land grab between Abu Bakar and the son of Taib Mahmud. That particular story basically showcases or highlights the problem with palm oil plantation. But when we talk about large companies, we are also talking about people who are working in these industries that might not be as nimble as you think they might be. Do you think it's unfair for them who are actually serving within this particular sector?
Large companies are always under attack. I mean, you look at Unilever, they're under attack. Nestle are under attack the whole time for selling powdered milk in Africa, you know, encouraging mothers to use powder, to use formula instead of breastfeeding. I mean, large companies are fair game. Everybody's fair game if they transgress. If you transgress, you're fair game.
All right, this is the story that we want to highlight. Same old story in Sarawak, latest land grab, Abu Bakar, Taib Mahmud, same old story yet again. Do you think that you know, this part of the Malaysia Baru will not be solved, you know, in the near term? Do you think that Sarawak will still be under the old?
I don't know. I hope it will be changed. Yeah, I mean, but it's not just that it's in Indonesia, it's in pretty much wherever there's palm oil is grown. I mean, to argue for palm oil, it's the most productive way of producing oil anywhere in the world, and it's a healthy oil. 38% of oil production is palm oil, and it takes up 6% of oil production land in the world. So it's a valuable crop, but the problem is it is so valuable that corrupt people with influence can grab the land. They can fell the forest, so they make the first profit, then they can plant palm oil, they make the second profit. So there needs to be a proper government mechanism to control this. And Malaysia's got this the wrong way around. Malaysia is a rich country, relatively rich. Of palm oil producers in the whole world, Malaysia's probably the richest of the lot. So Malaysia shouldn't be going, we're poor, we need to clear land to grow palm oil. What Malaysia should be doing is saying, we can afford to be custodians of wildlife. There are now 100,000 orangutans left in the world. The forecast for 2025 is for 47,000, so almost halving. I mean, a lot of that's Indonesia. When I came here, there were 500 tigers in Malaysia. Sorry, now it's thought there are 250, right? These kind of numbers. Malaysia's environmental policy and agricultural policy should be environment first. I mean, the old joke is that Malaysia's Minister for Environment is actually against it. But we now have a new Minister for Environment. There's no point in saying, look, we're not destroying the forest, because anyone who ever looks out of a plane window flying over Peninsular Malaysia or Sabah Sarawak can see quite clearly that palm oil is everywhere, and it's still spreading, and you can see the new plantings going in too. So I think Malaysia is a rich enough country to say, look, we're going to make sure that this land is preserved. If you want to grow palm oil, you can only grow it on this land. Now, I know there are issues with states and land rights and everything else, but if there's a will, there's a way. So there has to be the will. And then Malaysia, should sign up, should say, look, you all have to be RSPO certified by whatever year it is, and they should support the RSPO.
Yeah.
Malaysia has its own standard, but it's a lesser standard. Everybody can see through that. I mean, it's not bad, actually. The MSPO is pretty good too, but it is not as rigorous as RSPO. So Malaysia is rich enough to be saying, our palm oil will be the most sustainably grown palm oil in the world because it will all be RSPO, and we're going to protect the habitat of the orangutans, of the pangolins, the most important animal on the planet, of course, tigers, etc. And we will plant around that, and we'll have an agricultural policy.
All right, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about Pangolin Investment Management. Thanks for staying on with us. You're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. Joining me is James Hay of Pangolin Fund. He's the Director of Pangolin Investment Management. James, you made an impassionate plea that environment must come first. Let's take a look into your own company and the sectors that you invest in. If you can just pull up this particular graphic, this shows that you're very much into consumer discretionary as well as consumer staple. We've gone through this in previous interviews. You're big on consumer, but there's one thing that you don't invest in. If you can just pull up the next page, you don't invest in this. You don't invest in bad stuff, nasty stuff, clearing of jungle.
Those are my pictures out of the window when I went to Barrio in Sarawak.
And it's real. It's real. Anybody who goes to Sarawak, and for that matter Sabah, can see this.
Yeah. And if you have the latest Lonely Planet guide, by the time I got to Barrio and wanted to do some of the treks, they'd already gone. They'd already been cleared. They'd already been logged.
Right.
So those jungle treks weren't available.
And this is horrible because on one hand you are chasing profits, you are an investment firm, you want to maximize your investment portfolio for your investors. Yeah. But unlike most investors, you're saying the line stops here when it comes to environment.
I don't think like most investors, they're just people who have different lines. Right? Most people wouldn't invest in heroin production, right? So the lines are different. Yeah?
So you equate, you honestly equate.
No, I don't equate
palm oil with heroin management?
No, I don't equate it. I'm just saying there are different lines. Tobacco's another one. That's another line we won't do, right? If you're a Sharia investor, there's a lot of stuff you won't do either. People have different lines.
All right, let's pull up another graphic. Yeah. This particular one talks about the kind of things that people want to invest in, or you want people to invest in. Can you just pull up that particular graphic? Page 3, I suppose. Yeah. Could you talk to us about this?
Yeah, we've only ever owned 56 companies in our 14 years existence. We own about 20 now, and half the fund is in 5 of them. So we are very long-term investors in very few companies. And obviously we've made some mistakes here and there, but on the whole, our time is spent seeing companies, visiting managements, and buying companies for the long term. So long-term, bottom-up value investors, and that's what we're trying to do.
James, there is a story of your fund management not doing too well last year, but overall you've been growing about 11% annually according to your newsletter. Yeah. Do you think that last year was a really bad year for investors?
I think it was a bad year for investors. We were down 7% last year in US dollars. I think that's not too bad compared to many. I think what helped us is we are not in many companies and we're not in many markets. So our knowledge is not spread too thin. I know other guys who are maybe in 9 different countries, from India to China, Vietnam, everything else in between. It's quite hard to really know the companies inside out and know the countries inside out and know everything else that can affect your investment inside out there as well. So last year it helped us. Maybe this year our countries do badly and those ones will do better. But on the whole, I think the fact that we don't invest too widely and we're very concentrated, but we concentrate on what we own, so far has helped us in our last 14 years.
All right, a lot of criticism have been levelled against the Minister of Finance, YB Lim Guan Eng, saying that the kind of statements that he issues kind of spook investors and foreign money is leaving the country.
No.
Is there any truth in this?
No, I think it's absolutely right what he said. He's being totally honest. I mean, everybody sees through dishonest finance ministers. Yeah, they all see through it. That's how the Asian financial crisis happened. Yeah, you're too young to remember, but there was a time back in the 90s...
I take that as a compliment,
There was a time back in the 90s when I think it was Climate Benson, I'm not sure they still exist, their economists referred to Malaysia's economic policy as noddynomics. And of course there was all sorts of a hoo-ha from our current Prime Minister, who was the then Prime Minister, and Climate Benson had to do a lot of grovelling in order to get any work still in Malaysia. They were after corporate finance work. I think I got the house right. So if you try and gloss things over, people see through it. So I think Ling Guan En's been completely right. Just say it how it is. Look, we owe... It's not whatever it is, it's $1 trillion and more. Yeah. And it's tight. But this is how we're going to solve it. Yeah.
The problem is also not in just addressing the investors. He is a minister of the cabinet. He has to also manage expectations on the ground. There are politics at hand that he has to play. Yeah. And of course, sometimes you have to sing to the choir. Sometimes you have to be blunt. There is a problem there. Yeah. People have to admit that the mass is not going to like the kind of things that the Minister of Finance is going to say.
No, that's right. But I think fair play to him, to be honest, yeah, and not try and gloss over. So look, this is how bad it is. The hole's not this deep; it's down here. But this is how we're going to dig our way out of it. And I think he's been fairly clear on it, And then fingers crossed, inshallah, and everything else. Let's hope it all comes through.
Let's pull back to the story of the palm oil sector, and of course the Ministry of Primary Industries. Currently, one of the quieter ministries that are issuing, press statements, media releases, those kind of stuff. But they are handling and tackling big issues, including, rubber plantation, including, of course, palm oil themselves. Is there a time for us to actually have a long and hard look into how we do agriculture here in Malaysia?
Absolutely, but it should be driven from an environmental standpoint. That's what I'm saying. You should say, this is the land that can be farmed, and this is the land which can't be. But that should come from the Environment Minister, I hope, with a conservationist bent. Yeah? Because Malaysia's rich enough to keep its tigers. It's rich enough to keep its orangutans, right? Other countries can't have the same controls. Malaysia's a pretty well-governed country. I mean, despite all the hoo-ha, it's not that bad. Malaysia can instill this if it just takes the greed out of the decisions. Yeah? And then you can have and palm oil, of course, is the most productive way of producing things. And you've got to remember that it's the British who planted all the rubber first of all. So my forebears were responsible for deforestation. But the scale was different because they didn't have the same machinery and everything else. Right?
Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about your activism in terms of investment. If you can just pull up that particular graphic, the last page that I want to highlight today. This talks about, while you're not an activist fund, you do appear in all these kind of investment meetings.
So the problem we have is we generally only invest in companies which have net cash on their balance sheets. And when companies have cash on their balance sheets, they start thinking about ways of spending it. Okay, so if you've got a company that makes cups like this, and they've got a lot of cash, well, they might start thinking of making laptops like this or something else. So what we try to say to all our businesses is pay back all the cash that you have as dividends, and then if you want to go into making laptops instead of cups, then you'll have to have a rights issue, and that will have to be voted on by shareholders, and they will say no. And you can't just say, we've got lots of cash, we can open a laptop factory. It have to be considered properly. That money belongs to shareholders, and a guy who makes cups very well perhaps isn't a guy who can make laptops very well. So we try to, and we have some success on this, and sometimes we get knocked back, but on the whole I think companies are learning. I think in particular, very often in Malaysia, with family-owned countries, you have the elder patriarch who says, I've got cash, I want to buy stuff and amass assets. And perhaps you have his Harvard-educated sons waiting to take over, who probably understand what we're saying, but possibly the culture in Asia is not one to say, Dad, you're wrong. It's just to wait until you've actually got charged yourself to do it. So, but I think generally companies are learning that why have some companies on a PE of 10 and why are some on 20? Well, generally, the companies on 20 are the ones which are best at returning cash to shareholders via dividends. And if you look at the multinationals, they just pay dividends. They don't do share buybacks, they don't do bonuses, they don't do splits, they don't do warrants or any of this stuff. Every spare penny they have, dividends come back. You look at the multiples of BAT, the breweries, etc.
Right.
It's reflected in the share price. Nestle is the prime example.
But you just said that you won't invest in tobacco.
We won't invest in tobacco. No.
Yeah.
I'll invest in a brewery. Yeah.
We'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more about palm oil and activism in investment. Don't go anywhere. watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. If you've just joined us, we are talking about investment, particularly in the sector of palm oil, which has taken a lot of flack recently. Joining me is James Hay of Pangolin Fund, the Director of Pangolin Investment Management. James, you were telling us just now, about 4 or 5 minutes ago, that you wanted to see more investment into environment if it's done correctly. Don't you think that your role as an investor would play that part very important in terms of getting things done correct?
Yeah.
Don't you think that you need to invest now in palm oil sectors?
No. I don't need to invest in palm oil sectors because it leads to deforestation, destruction of habitat, loss of people's land. I mean, people's land, it's not a well-managed sector, right? It's not effectively managed well enough. Yeah? Even the so-called blue chips like IOI a few years ago were kicked out or suspended from the RSPO for cheating. They denied it. They tried to get around it. In the end, they had to turn around and say, actually, we're guilty. We'll put it right.
But they've done so much lobbying, not just them.
Well, they've done lobbying, but why are you lobbying? Why are they even breaking the rules? Yeah? So part of the problem the RSPO has is that it needs members. And therefore, I think some people are maybe banking on, well, they can't kick us out because there won't be any members. And then you have certainly situations in Indonesia where you might have a company that's a member and complying as much as can be checked. But actually, they then buy palm oil from an associate or a subsidiary or just from a third party or even a family company, a related party but not part of the listed company or whatever, which isn't complying. So it's very hard to check. But if governments really get behind RSPO and really show a commitment, and then with technology and drones and everything else, it's much easier to monitor all this. So Malaysia should be a champion of environmentally friendly palm oil, right? It shouldn't still be saying, look how much forest we've got, because when you look out the window, there is some forest, but it's quite hard to spot amongst the palm oil.
Right. The only reason, not the only reason, the main reason I got you into this interview is because of that email that you sent out. And according to you, a lot of your investors are replying saying that, good for you, this is a good thing to do.
It's the most favourable response I've ever had from any email I've sent to my clients. I've had so much favourable response. People say, thanks for doing this. Or because since you alerted me to this, we've stopped investing in palm oil stocks. Yeah? I mean, it needs more. We need local fund managers to get onto this too. You need to be looking at the timber industry as well, timber companies. Why are brokers still promoting timber? Why are brokers still promoting timber stocks, which are clear felling timber, basically?
But the reason why it's called primary industries is because it's used for other sectors as well.
Yeah,
You're a big investor in Nestle. I'm sure they have a lot of palm oil products.
Yeah, they do, but it's becoming less, right? And you would hope that everything they buy is RSPO, and you would hope that they are careful enough to make sure it is. And you find in Europe now that if it's not RSPO, they're going to have trouble selling it. And then you got stores like Iceland have tried to ban palm oil. People look, and it's very common in the UK. People look on the side of a packet, it says palm oil, they'll put it back on the shelf, find something else, right? So the problem is, what Malaysia should say is, OK, hands up, we've destroyed a lot of forest. Instead of saying we haven't destroyed a lot of forest, they change it around. We've destroyed lots of forest. We've made lots of mistakes. We're not alone. I mean, Britain used to be covered in forest. They all went too, right? Europe was all forest too. America was too, right? But we're not alone. But we've done this. So from now on, we're going to be as environmentally friendly as we can. And we will produce environmentally friendly palm oil. People will pay more for it, you hope. You hope at some point the populations of India, China, Pakistan, the developing world will also want to pay more for it. And Malaysia could set the standard, right? Because Malaysia is not a poor country. It doesn't have to be a follower. It can be a leader. It can be a leader. Just new Malaysia can be a leader.
All right, there you go. That was my conversation with James Hay of Pangolin Investment Management. James, again, thanks very much for joining us. Remember, you can catch this interview on all our sites at astronomy.com as well as on our app. Just search for Notepad. For Ibrahim Sani. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.